Thank you for taking the time to review this material about how to obtain verbal consent for patient prior to TBI research. I will keep this short and sweet, but I want to cover some background to the need for this training. Who can enroll, the process of enrolling patients, and including what to tell them and how to obtain verbal consent to participate, and separate from the research but very important, the medical record release form and how we document. To get started, I want you to know that the Institution Review Board, with Dr. Finch as our PI or leader, approved this project in April of 2017. All the planning and equipment involved allowed the start date to begin in January of 2018. Since the start date, about 10 patients have agreed to participate, which seems to be a pretty small number. I also want to let you know that we've clarified that the population that we're testing or allowing to enroll in this research is a bit different than when we first started. We've determined that the patients who've had alcohol and drugs are still okay as long as they are medically stable to perform and choose to perform the testing, if they're willing. We also determined that it's not just domestic violence with head injury needed to capture data on. We want both sexual assault and DV with and without head trauma. They're all likely patients that could enroll. Our sample then becomes more frequent participants. We actually have more that can enroll. So many of the patients that you're caring for actually were eligible. So now we have that clarified, both sexual assault and if they have had alcohol or drugs, it is okay as long as they're medically seem pretty with it. Anyway, the IRB then reviewed and discovered that we had a signature on our consent form. We were obtaining a signature once the person allowed us to add those 3 additional tests. The consent form that we were using was created and approved by IRB, but we added the signature piece and a collection of information about the patient to refer them on for medical. During that process, that additional lines with the signatures and names was not approved by IRB. So we need to go back to no consent with signature, just reviewing the form, giving the patient the actual review or information sheet, and then they will verbally consent. No signature is required. In the medical world, we're not used to that, not getting a signature, but that is how it is written, and that is what we need to be doing, just verbal consent. So we're now ready to begin with enrollment again, and I need to know that you all are informed that verbally we are consenting. No signature is required for the IRB, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about who's involved and then the documentation that we need to be creating. Let's quickly review who can enroll. So both sexual assault patients and domestic violence. If they're an adult, so no minors, no one under the age of 18. No one who's pregnant, no prisoners. Patients must be able to legally and medically make their own decisions. Medically, if their condition or state of mind or physical state is unstable and it concerns you, then that person is not eligible. We want the priority and research enrollment should only be secondary to the medical care needs. Mesa Police Department is the partnership that we have the agreement with for this study. So if they're a Mesa agency at this time, that's who we will be enrolling in our study. We want to do baseline testing, and we'll talk about more what the research is being used for in a minute. At the Mesa Family Advocacy Center, there is a verbal consent form. It's the same informational sheet as before, but this time the name and information portion at the bottom has been removed. 3 extra tests of near-point convergence, balance plate, hand-eye coordination is the part the patient's agreeing to do. This should not happen until the end of the exam, as I don't want the patient's exam to be altered to fit the extra tests in. It will cost nothing to the patient, and every part of this is de-identified to the researchers that are analyzing the data. The IRB project will be getting consent for us to look at the data collected from the 3 tests and the information gathered during the exam routinely. Before the testing and aftercare results with a near-point convergence or any other follow-up testing will not be analyzed as part of this research. Now I want to review with you what Honor Health research is really not covering, just so you're not misinformed. The Mesa Police Department results, any neurology or specialty follow-up following our exam and initial testing will not be analyzed at this time. Our project does not include that. It could possibly at a later date be retrospectively looked at and compared to ours, but at this point we are not a part of that portion of any of the information that's being collected. So that signature that we're obtaining only on a medical record release, not on the research, is part of just standard medical care to release records to a specialist. It has nothing to do with consent for participation in the IRB. A patient might be eligible for care following our exam, say for whatever they may have problems with due to the traumatic brain injury, or potential screening for further care might be needed, and the medical record release is important for that aspect. This slide is just a copy of the emailed version of the consent form. I will give you a copy of it. They're also available in Mesa. It reviews the content of what is included in the research. I will go ahead and, like I said, email that. Make yourself comfortable and familiar with it to be able to summarize and review with the patient. Let's talk about the patient consent. So for the TBI screening to be done, we just need to ask the patient if they're willing to participate in the research, if they were eligible, and no signature is needed for those 3 additional tests. The patient could stop at any time if they decide not to do this. It is ideal if we get all 3 tests. And then the only thing that we are having the patient sign is a medical record or PHI release, which is completely separate from research, but it's extremely important because that allows us to refer them on, if they feel it's necessary, to any specialists for that improved follow-up care and better outcome for a patient that could have sustained a traumatic brain injury. That referral form and coordination will be kept separate from the research. Now I guess here's the tricky part, what we write down, what we include in the chart and what we don't. The documentation, we are going to be documenting the results of screening. It's much like a blood pressure, writing down the results of some other screening tool. The word screening is the key word, not research. The numbers or results from the tests can be included in the additional note and should be included. What I don't want you to add in the additional note is any discussion about research or research for the patient or that they declined the research. It is important to the IRB that we not include the fact that a patient has consented or did not consent to research. We don't want their care to be impacted by whether or not they are enrolling or not enrolling in a research project. This information is to be kept separate from the medical record. I hope I've cleared up some of the questions or concerns and retrained you to know that we are now only obtaining verbal consent for research and do not need a signature for that. If you have any questions, I'm always open to answering them. Erin and myself both should have, clear instructions about this. And I really hope that you all understand that this is important information. It's really baseline data that is going to be analyzed and hopefully published for people to have a better understanding of what the typical domestic violence head injury markers are. And it could be used as baseline information for, really a lot of other things to unravel. So the information from police department and follow-up medical is not a part of this research at this time. The documentation should not include the word research into the medical record, and the patient is only verbally consenting. The key word is screening when you're documenting, and that PHI or medical record release is still very important, so we can refer them on for proper medical care, which is the most important part for the best outcome for the patient. I appreciate you taking the time to review this. It is important that you sign off or let me know the signature via email or complete the form that I have sent. And I need you to confirm that you have reviewed this material and are aware that verbal consent is now required. Thank you.